After countless hours of airtime, acres and acres of newsprint, multiple debates, myriad sound bites, piles of punditry, and all those polls, the U.S. presidential election entered a new phase this past week. People actually voted. Not many, about 350,000 Americans caucused in the state of Iowa, but votes were cast and delegates chosen, the first for those seeking the nomination of the two main parties for the White House. It was a bad night for Donald Trump, conventional wisdom, and the notion that media exposure amounts to political currency that candidates can cash in on at the ballot box. Trump, the undisputed media darling, finished behind Ted Cruz on the Republican side. As for the Democrats, Bernie Sanders, who the news channels paid scant attention to until very recently, ended in a photo finish alongside Hilary Clinton, the heavy favorite for the nomination. It's early, and Iowa is usually a better indicator of who cannot win as opposed to who can, but this much we do know. There's a large gap between the candidates the mainstream media like to cover and those people actually vote for. Our starting point this week is the first stop on the road to the White House, Iowa. Politicians are advised to be gracious, win or lose. Bernie Sanders was still in a virtual tie with Hilary Clinton on caucus night when he was less than diplomatic, and only for a moment, when talking about an election process that has revealed as much about the U.S. mainstream media as it has about the country they cover.
The people of Iowa have sent a very profound message to the political establishment, to the economic establishment, and, by the way, to the media establishment.
Sanders definitely made it clear and throughout the last couple of months that he felt as though the media was brushing off the movement around him, his campaign, and was paying more attention to Clinton, who everybody thought is going to be the presumptive nominee.
There's a lot of king-making, or in this case, queen-making, that goes on in the news media. They kind of pre-select the people who they think are viable, and they really give short shrift to everybody else. I was so shocked back in the summer of 2013 when the New York Times put a beat reporter full-time on Hilary Clinton. And there's been story after story, of course, about Hilary Clinton. And the public editor of the New York Times, Margaret Sullivan, just pointed out in her most recent column that the Times only assigned a reporter full-time to Bernie Sanders a few weeks ago. And given how high profile he has otherwise been in the past few months, it's kind of astonishing.
Bernie Sanders is someone who is obsessive about issues that normally the mainstream media in the United States does not care about.
The status quo is simply not acceptable.
Issues like child poverty, youth unemployment, which is almost never talked about by anyone, climate change, issues like Trans-Pacific Partnership, which corporate media almost entirely does not cover. They did not realize how much of a thirst there was among the American public for a substance-based campaign basically against the system as it exists today, the political and media system. And I think that's just something the media didn't know how to tackle.
People don't want to hear.
Didn't know how to tackle or didn't want to tackle.
What they want to know is what your vision is for America.
The issues Bernie Sanders raises, the systemic social changes he advocates, are not easily explained in the sound bites that most television news stories are built around. And that does make his campaign a challenge to cover. But when you do the math, the size of the crowds he attracted in 2015, the record number of donors sending his campaign money, and compare that with the relatively small amount of coverage he was getting, it is difficult to conclude that some of the media's indifference to Sanders doesn't come down to ideology.
It was assumed that he couldn't possibly construct a decent infrastructure in the way that Hillary Clinton did. And he's also lasted in sort of corporate-like fashion as crazy, lefty, trying to, nationalize things or something like that.
How can any kind of socialist win a general election in the United States?
Your own state can't even carry it through. How's America going to do it?
Is it really possible for someone who calls himself a socialist to be elected president of the United States?
Well, so long as Americans don't have a very sophisticated sense of what socialism might mean, even though in many cases, once explained to them, they might well approve of.
Sanders is against the agenda that probably most of the companies such as Comcast and Viacom, who own the major media networks, are for, and News Corporation as well. But I think there's also something else going on with the socialist label, which is that most people who are in the media today tend to be older folks who grew up during the Red Scare or the Cold War. And I don't think they understand that younger people under 40, we did not grow up under any Red Scare. We are not scared of communists, and we're certainly not scared of socialists who we may associate with, like, let's say, IKEA or, the country of Norway, not very menacing, images.
If Bernie Sanders raises issues the U.S. media, for whatever reason, have an aversion to, then Donald Trump speaks a language the media understand and embrace.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
He's a war hero because he was captured.
You got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
The evening news broadcasts gorged themselves on Trump stories in 2015, doing more reports on him than the entire Democratic field combined. Trump went into Iowa leading the polls on the Republican side and seemed confident enough in those polls that he chose to skip a debate on Fox News.
And everyone on this stage is stupid, fat, and ugly. Now that we've gotten the Donald Trump portion out of the way.
Fox is a conservative network that Republican candidates usually court like love-struck schoolboys. And Trump looked rejected when he finished second to Texas Senator Ted Cruz.
Fox News, which has normally been kind of an untouchable place for Republican candidates, suddenly start getting attacked. Whether Trump's decision to skip the debate was a mistake or not, if you were watching Fox News after the results were coming in, they were definitely taking the tack that it was probably a mistake.
After he skipped the debate on Thursday, that late breakers were probably not going to go his way.
Cruz's campaign in Iowa being more organized than Trump's certainly played a role in how well he did, but I think the other components of that have to do with mainstream media tending always to underappreciate the role of religion in American life, and he was delivering these very overt religious messages, which I think really resonated with a lot of people in Iowa.
Trump appeals exactly to the vanities and the superficialities of the U.S. media. What they want to talk about is someone says something outrageous and lets everyone yell at each other and debate about it and shout about it, and Trump is the made-for-media candidate in that respect, and I think that's a big part of the reason he did get that obsessive coverage in this campaign, even if his candidacy doesn't end up being nearly as potent as the media pretended.
For the pundits who populate the U.S. airwaves and the sages who pen the must-read columns, having overestimated Donald Trump and underestimated Bernie Sanders, what could possibly go wrong in New Hampshire and this week's primary? But that's one of the benefits of covering an election marathon. You're only as wrong as your last story. And come November, Iowa, New Hampshire, and the conventional corporate wisdom that came undone will be long forgotten.
The way the journalists cover Iowa and New Hampshire, they can't help themselves. They know that these two places have not been particularly predictive, but they're so easy to cover. They play to the myth of the single American having political influence. They provide nice town hall meetings that are perfect for television. And so the same media who rolls their eyes over exaggerated significance given to these two places now covers those two places like a blanket in ways they never had before.